as this video that I took shows, as he tried to join the picket line, first the NYPD literally tried to throw him back in the vehicle and put his seatbelt back on, like keep driving. And then when he insisted on coming out, they arrested him. And it's funny, you can see a sign, one of the picket signs says "Obey the law," speaking to Amazon. But there's the NYPD have no right to arrest someone for doing this. He has the right to be involved in this strike. The picketers have no, Amazon is breaking the law by refusing to bargain with its own workers, and yet there's just one person under arrest here, and it's this driver.
Yeah, I mean, it is pretty crazy.
And I would say that, like, apparently from what I hear, in New York it was particularly bad. I mean, the police very explicitly broke the picket line after several hours of a serious picket line. After arresting Rosario, dozens of them, they said they were going to arrest everyone if they didn't start letting vehicles through. They had no right to arrest everyone. People were on a publicly owned sidewalk. And yet it's very clear that, people were asking me, why would they do this? The NYPD doesn't work for Amazon. And the answer is, well, maybe they do. And Amazon is very powerful in this city. And so I'm curious what will result from that, but it was really remarkable to see the cops explicitly kind of protecting the flow of capital.
So I have a question about that. Aren't cops also wage employees that also have a union, as a matter of fact?
They do have a union, but I wouldn't say I wouldn't say they're workers like any other. I mean, I always say when workers meet cops on the picket line, the cops are facing them, right? They meet them as obstacles to the picket line. The cop places themselves on the wrong side of history, and I think that's just naturally how we should see it. Cops always have been there to kind of protect the flow of business interests in this country, and it becomes very explicit in times like this where you see NYPD literally locking arms to ensure that Amazon's packages can get out. Usually it's not so obvious, but there's no question that when you look at these images that cops are not in the labor movement; they're meeting the labor movement as obstacles.
Yeah, it's confusing because I love cops, and I thought that they were unionized employees, but look at it seems like they're holding hands here to demonstrate solidarity with the working class. But what is happening here, if you don't mind me asking?
So the cops were forming these lines to ensure that they were starting to form lines to ensure that the vans could go through. So it was early stages
Is
of
this
that.
guy wearing a loss prevention jacket?
Yeah, so Amazon's loss prevention people are the ones that basically were ensuring each car would go through. So they were like, it was the cops hand in hand with Amazon's operations team, ensuring that the vehicles would go through.
Interesting. So they weren't locking arms in unity with the picketing workers. It seems like they were locking arms to stop the picketing workers from stopping the delivery drivers from going into the facility.
That's correct. It was stopping the picketers from preventing the cars from going out of the lot.
So let's talk about the demands being made by DSP a little bit more, like by these striking workers a little bit more. What are the conditions? What do the conditions look like for these guys in general? The people that are on the picket line, and what do they want?
So the delivery drivers for Amazon that work for DSPs, at this facility in New York City, they make about $22 an hour, which is not much in New York City. They generally deliver, hundreds of packages per shift. So as you've probably seen, Amazon drivers will hop out in the middle of the street and run up and drop off packages. They're very short time, just like warehouse workers inside the facilities. They do very similar jobs to UPS drivers, which is why it kind of makes sense that the Teamsters are organizing with them. And I actually was speaking to one worker who's very much an active member of this union at that location in Queens. And he used to be a UPS driver, and he's like, I'm doing the exact same job and I have no benefits. I'm making like a quarter of what I was making at UPS. And it's completely ludicrous. They have no health insurance. That's another thing that is one of their key demands here. This breaks their body. I spoke to one worker who's in the union who talked about being given, faulty equipment that could have hurt her. And she was told, no, it was fine. It was her fault. And again, this is a young woman who had to carry these packages and had asked for equipment that would help her with that. So it's basic demands here. But right now, the strike isn't even about one particular thing like healthcare or more money. It's about literally having Amazon sit down and start talking to them. And Amazon
And recognizing them as like employees, you're saying, right? Because currently they're gig employees.
yeah.
Um,
But it's not only that Amazon is refusing to do that for these drivers, Amazon is also still refusing to do that at JFK 8, where the employees are already their employees, right? There's no dispute that those workers who joined the ALU, which is now part of the Teamsters, there's never been a dispute that they are employees, and Amazon is still obstructing and trying to get out of having to bargain with them. They won that victory 2.5 years ago now. And so Amazon is obstructing workers whether they're employees or not. So I think it's important to know that Amazon wouldn't act any different if these employees were differently classified. They have no interest in treating these people better.
Okay. So there, the Amazon driver, Yogurt Nizin Cardenas is the name. I'm butchering that. Has been freed. I wanted to hear what he had to say. Let's take a look.
Up earlier, so he's got a few words. Give it up for him, everybody.
We got to keep it together so we can make this shit happen. That's the only way we want to make it happen. We not, whoever don't want to be here, keep it moving. That's all. We got to be up
earlier.
What do you think about the media coverage surrounding this? Because I feel like a lot of people are hyper focused on the Luigi Mangione case right now, as he was extradited to New York. They perp walked him earlier this morning. We don't know if he killed the United Healthcare CEO or not, but people certainly seem to think so. And many people are saying that he may or may not even be a saint or a hero. I would never, of course. I condemn violence. I do not condone it. Having said that, do you feel like there's appropriate coverage on these kinds of labor movements in general, like broadly from mainstream press?
I think we have over the past few years, and I'm sure you've seen this, gotten a lot more coverage of labor. And some of it is better. Though when I was looking at kind of the interviews, I looked at what Sean O'Brien was being asked on Fox Business today, and even on some more mainstream rather than right-wing publications. The focus is still always on how is this affecting consumers. Like, it was incredible. The TV host kept asking Sean O'Brien, but aren't you punishing consumers? What about Santa? How do you explain this to the American public? It's this belief that, again, like, workers are this separate group from the American public who presumably are all rich people who just order from Amazon and could never be affected by poor working conditions. And that is something that has been the case ever since the American labor movement was in decline, for the past half a century, that all of a sudden the news media presents workers as like this threat to you, the reader or the viewer. And I think we're still seeing that. And it's very obvious with this, even though, as much as I hate to say it, and I wish it weren't true, these strikes are not going to affect very many packages, right? These are 10,000 workers around total. At 7 facilities out of hundreds of facilities and hundreds of thousands of workers that do this job. So while I wish it was more, it's a very small start to an organizing campaign. And yet you see this hysteria about, like, how will people get their packages for Christmas? And so I think there's a long way to go. And, there's a reason that a lot of these outlets don't, they're never going to change their coverage. They would rather these workers just shut up and let the Capitol.
Yeah, there's also the Longshoremen Union with a looming threat of a port strike that has the potential of happening as well. It says here that Trump again backs Longshore Union as a possible port strike. Now, the reason why I wanted to bring this up is because when the Longshoremen did actually threaten to strike a couple months prior, there was very similar commentary on this. They talked about the leader of the union and how wealthy he is and all this stuff. And I think one of the things that they engaged in their communications was just like being uncompromising and openly talking about Harold Daggett, openly talking about the importance of labor unions and the importance of the longshoremen in general, the dock workers, like the treacherous nature of the job, the harrowing conditions and how hard they work throughout COVID, for example, putting their lives at risk, putting their safety at risk without ever demanding anything else and generating a tremendous amount of profit. I feel overall, Americans are very selfish people, and it's very hard to instill class solidarity amongst them, and it's very hard to even get them to recognize that they are in a very similar condition to these unionized workers. But it did feel like, given the power that the longshoremen had, given the power that the ILA had in completely shutting down American logistics, they were forced, the companies at least were forced to concede to their demand, at least in the interim period. So how do we get Americans broadly to understand that labor unions are good? I know this is a very difficult, this is the most complicated question of all time, but what do you think is effective?
I mean, the controversial answer here is that, as you said, with the ILA and the ILWU is the longshoremen union on the West Coast, you actually don't need the public to agree with you if you have the leverage. Like, this is a fight between you and your boss. And if you have the organization, you can force them to concede no matter how much they whine on the media and how much the public is up in arms. And that is good. It is why it's one of many reasons people talk about workers having the power, right? And I think there's something to be said about the idea that if and when, I would hope to say when, workers get more power in this country, there will be backlash. There are inconveniences to growing labor power. And it has to be, people like us are, of course, doing what we can, kind of like pushing this message, talking about why, it actually makes sense and is good for, say, longshoremen to have sustainable conditions rather than, I remember I was writing about the ILA strike. These workers were exhausted. They were not being safe. This is bad for everybody. But at the same time, it's really workers themselves who just, it's up to them and they don't really need you. Workers just have to get organized, and then they can force the boss to listen to their whims. That said, back in the day, Americans were pro-union. They're fairly pro-union now.